All right, welcome to the AdaptX podcast, where we have conversations with individuals who are building accessible businesses, advocating for inclusion, or excelling in adaptive sports. Our intention is never to speak on behalf of those with disabilities, but provide a platform to share insights into a more accessible world. Today, we are joined by Dr. Hayley Kavanagh. She is currently working in the role of Research and Developmental Coordinator for the Young Athletes Program with Special Olympics Ireland, designing and implementing a coach-led fundamental movement skill intervention. She previously undertook the role of Health and Wellbeing Coordinator for the organization, increasing their health education program reach by 300%. Her doctoral studies at Dublin City University focused on fundamental movement skill proficiency in children with intellectual disabilities. Hayley, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I want to quickly mention for our listeners in the US, which is most of our audience, that Hayley might refer to FMS as the fundamental movement skills. Our fitness professionals in the States might be familiar with that abbreviation as functional movement screen, but two very different assessments and objectives. And throughout the episode, I'll let you clarify what that consists of and how it's measured. So for me personally, I had a very formative experience with Special Olympics. It was my first introduction to disability at 15 years old. And over the last, I guess, half of my life, the last 15 years has revolved around inclusion in sport and fitness. Did you have a unique experience that initially influenced this career path?
Yeah, absolutely. In Ireland, we have like our final year exams in high school called the Leaving Certificate. So at that time, everyone's trying to compete to get as many points as possible to get a college degree or course that you want to attend. So I knew I wanted to work somewhere in like the health and kind of science space, but I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. And I did really well, but the course that I got given then was sports science and health at Dublin City University. And at the time, I was a bit disappointed with how I performed, even though overall it would be deemed a good score. And I said, look, I'll go in, I'll try sports science, and I can do physiotherapy afterwards if I want to or if I need to. So I went in, and in the first year, we covered a topic called adapted physical activity. And it was the first time that I'd ever heard of that phrase. It was the first time that I'd ever, even heard of the concept of sport and physical activity for people with disabilities. And I went up to my lecturer and said, how do I get involved in this area? It just really, really intrigued me. And she said, go and volunteer with your local Special Olympics club. So, having no knowledge in basketball or prior experience, I went down to my local club and I was assistant coaching and just helping out with children who were learning to play basketball for Special Olympics. And then I was there for about a year or two, and they were rolling out a new program called Young Athletes, which was for children with ID aged 4 to 12 years. So I kind of took a lead role on that program and rolling it out within the club setting, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I was volunteering then right up until COVID hit, really, and then we kind of went online for a bit. So that's how my love for this area really grew. And again, during college, we had the opportunity to do a placement, like a 6 month work experience. So I chose, and again, we had to interview and it was quite competitive, but I had the opportunity to work at an intellectual disability service, so in their gym and swim programs. And that organization is called Stewart's Care. So again, it was a totally different side. This time it was adults that we were getting to work with for the first time, and just seeing how much sport and physical activity meant for them. During that time period of the placement as well, there was a few people who were coming into the gym who were users of motorized wheelchairs, and one guy in particular had said to me that he had an acquired intellectual disability and he remembered what it was like to play football before he then was a motorized wheelchair user. So I got my thinking cap on, and I remember again we had learnt about power chair football, and I think our lecturer had told us about boxes that you could put on the front of the chair. So that's what we went out and did, and we brought plastic boxes, cable tied them to the front of the motorized wheelchairs, got really large footballs, and we started Ireland's first intellectual disability power chair football team. So that was really exciting, and we did a big fundraiser and actually raised money for proper equipment and actual guards to go on the front of the chairs, because when people were crashing into each other, the boxes were just flying and splintering everywhere. Um, and then from there, just before I finished my final year, I actually got a job running the sport and physical activity programs for that organization. Again, it was a really blessed opportunity that came about. So that's how it started, really, for me.
Do you remember? It's something that I've been asked before, and I haven't always been able to pinpoint it or accurately describe it. Do you remember like what the emotions you felt were, or like what kind of initially drew you? Because I started with unified basketball as
Hmm.
well, and it was, I guess it was kind of like a youth athletes, young athletes program because
Yeah.
there wasn't that differentiation at the time, but we did have kids that were all the way down
Hmm.
to 5 or 6. But I just remember being drawn to the unique aspect of those relationships where the athletes we were working with really just wanted my time instead of they didn't
Hmm.
have these expectations for me like what college are you going to go to, how'd you perform in your varsity basketball game this weekend, like all they cared about was like me being present, and I found that
Yeah.
very refreshing. But I was wondering if there was like a specific aspect of the experience that drew you in.
I think it's the people themselves. Like once you get it, like we always slag and joke with Special Olympics, saying, once you go to one session, you're hooked.
Yeah.
You're not getting away. You're gonna want to come back time and time again. But I think it's those people that you get to meet, and like you said, it's very much about your time and being there in the moment. And I think you giving them 10 minutes of your time means so much to them as well, and that just comes back in like leaps and bounds. It's such a nice feeling being there and just getting to know people. I think for the children as well, it's other things, where parents are might be saying, look, they're having difficulty in school, but the minute they come into the sports hall, they're running in, they're meeting friends for the first time. It's the relationships, even with each other, that are built in that environment of Special Olympics as well. So, yeah, I just love the people. I just love working with them.
Yeah. The university system might be a little different in Ireland than it is in the States, but like you mentioned, an assessment that you took towards the end of high
Hmm.
school that determined what path you were going to go.
Yeah.
Is that a competency assessment like the US has SATs, or is that like a match fit type of assessment?
No, it is more competency based. So it's 8 subjects, English, maths, history, science, those type of subjects. And yeah, it's a point system. So it's basically how well you can perform on the day. And they're delivered over a 2 week period. So you're just going in exam after exam after exam. And it's based off your marks performed on that single day, essentially. So
Yeah, that's tough.
very
Yeah.
stressful at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. What were your doctoral studies like? Did you have a specific research goal?
Yeah, so I suppose when I talk about stress, I still think those high school exams are probably the most stressful time. Even with the doctoral stuff was quite challenging at times, but still very enjoyable. I think the reason I suppose I got interested in the area of research as well as part of the sports science degree, we do research and things. And again, in final year, you have to pick a topic of your choice. And at that time, I'd pretty much decided I love the area of adaptive physical activity. This is where what I want to go into. And I had some exposure volunteering with other PhD and doctoral researchers on their projects, and one study in particular was called Moving Well, Being Well, and we were going around across the island of Ireland assessing children's fundamental movement skills. And these were children now in mainstream primary education. So that was my first taste of, fundamental movement skills and the idea of physical literacy. So for my project then I decided, what does that look like then for children with intellectual disabilities, because what I'd seen and from the research it showed that typically developing children had quite poor levels of motor skill proficiency, and I could only imagine with all the opportunities presented to them what was it going to be like on the other hand then for children who weren't presented with as much opportunity to take part in sport and physical activity. So again, we kind of started that research or piloted it then in my final year, and then COVID did hit at that time as well. So it was only around November, I think 2020, then when we'd put an application in to say, okay, we actually want to do this as a doctoral research study and take it a bit further. And we had originally approached Special Olympics Ireland in 2019 to kind of flag the idea with them and just see what they thought. And Karen Coventry, who's the director of sport there, and she's my boss now, was like, she loves evidence-based research, and it's something that was relatively new for the organisation. They hadn't gone down that path before, so they were taking a chance. And the young athletes, they see it as they're the future of the Special Olympics program. You know, they're coming in, we want to give them the best opportunity to develop their fundamental movement skills, but yet they had no findings on how was the program going, are the children developing their skills, what is their baseline levels like. So that's really where the project kind of stemmed from.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you look solely at the literature, and I'm sure it's accurate in many ways. Individuals with disabilities, lower gross motor functioning
Hmm.
abilities, and I wonder sometimes if that's a product of their disability or whether it's a product of a lack of opportunities to develop. Can you speak on like nature versus nurture? Does it appear to be specific to a diagnosis, or does it maybe stem from a lack of opportunities to good programming like young athletes?
I think there's a bit of both, definitely. I think that in terms of, say, the cognitive side of things, that what the research would say is that because of, say, the cognitive disability, that then developmentally children with intellectual disabilities are behind their typically developing peers. Like they might learn to walk at a later stage and things like that, which means then their movement patterns are developing at a later rate. But then on the other side of things, there is definitely less opportunities for children with ID to take part in sport and physical activity, and even anecdotal evidence that we would have heard, or if a child with an intellectual disability is attending a mainstream primary school, we've heard stories of them being left out of physical education class, like they're left sitting on a bench because maybe the teacher doesn't know how to adapt the activity to include them, or there's a fear or worry maybe from parents or from teachers about what if they get injured or what if they get hurt, side of things as well. So I definitely think it's a combination of both. But then again, from what we've seen when we're out in the field as well, is that children who tend to take part in more than one activity, so more than one sport, or they're being physically active more than one day a week, their fundamental movement skill proficiency is definitely higher because they've had more exposure to it. And I think the key about fundamental movement skills is that the more you need to be provided with opportunities to learn, reinforce, and practice them. It's the same with everything, with reading, with writing. The more we do it, the better we are at it. So yeah, exactly the same for fundamental movement skills.
Yeah, that learn, reinforce, practice is
Mm,
essential because I think sometimes there's a lot of seasonal based programs for people with
yeah.
disabilities, but it's like same thing in the fitness space. But if you came to me with a specific fitness goal, uh, and my response was, yeah, we have our next 8 week program starting next month. And then
Hmm.
after that 8 week program, the next one starting a month later. Like,
Yeah.
that's not the best recipe for fitness improvement, motor skill improvement, etc.
Hmm.
So it really reinforces the essential piece of year round programming, I suppose.
Yeah, and the young athletes program is a year-round program, which is great. So the only time it really runs alongside the school year, so the only time periods that the children would not be taking part is over the summer months. And again, some clubs, depending on volunteer availability, they might run through or for as long as they can through the summer as well. And then at Christmas time, maybe for 2 weeks or in December. So it is a really good program in that respect, that it is year round. However, it is just one day a week. So we are really trying to encourage athletes to take part in other things outside of the program as well. And once athletes are between the ages of 6 and 8, it is sport dependent. They can join other sports programs that we have on offer with Special Olympics. Um, However, we are obviously trying to encourage, I think one thing that the coaches tell me they struggle with a bit sometimes is managing parents' expectations, because they might say, my child has been in the program a year, I want them to go to a sport. And we're trying to say, but they haven't developed all of the skills
Mm.
that they need to be able to play basketball or to play football or to do those things. So I
Yeah.
think if it is the one day a week, we need to be recognizing that it might take a bit longer. Whereas if they're physically active outside of the program, then those skills will develop at a faster rate.
So is this seen as a prerequisite to participation or like a supplementary option?
So at the moment, we probably are trying to go down the prerequisite route a bit. It was only introduced in 2016, this young athletes program, for the first time, because prior to that, it would have been, I think, children had to be aged 8 to join the sports program. So parents were looking for their children to get into things earlier, which of course, any other child might start a sport or, at age 4, it could be. So that's why the program then was introduced. So yeah, look, we are trying to say that it's a prerequisite, but we don't stop anybody if they want to wait and join a sports program either.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wonder if sometimes the best way to get better at a sport is to practice it or just to be engaged in it to a degree.
Hmm.
So, the parallel between like you have to meet XYZ standard to participate, or you start participating, you identify where the deficits are, and then you try to address those deficits either within practice or within
Hmm.
supplementary training. Yeah, it's an interesting model, but you had mentioned some of the cognitive deficits may be contributing to slower processing speeds and
Hmm.
lower gross motor skills. While we push like authentic inclusion, so people with and without disabilities like seamlessly coexisting or various diagnoses coexisting, could you make the case for like more specialized programs being beneficial for people with disabilities? So, for example, in the States, there's like Down Syndrome Sports of America. So, for athletes solely with Down syndrome, could you make the case for specialized being advantageous to kind of level the playing field?
I think that's an interesting question. I suppose we also are looking at society and what's happening in our communities and things like that as well. So while you might say, okay, so everybody with Down syndrome, let's do this program because, we can tailor it. Obviously, tailoring it to meet individual needs is so important, but I think that that can happen at a sports session or the young athletes program anyway. Because with the help of the coaches and volunteers, they get to know their athletes really, really well. I think that that is what is more important than, I suppose, grouping people into more kind of categories for sport. I think Special Olympics in general, we are segregated in that sense that it is only for people with intellectual disabilities, or I know in the United States you have unified sport. So at the moment in Ireland, we haven't rolled out that program model as of yet. I think in the future it's probably something that the organization might look at, but as of now, we're solely a program for people with ID. And I think as part of coach education and training, that catering for the individual athlete and to meet their individual needs is part of what we do anyway. So everybody should be able to be included and catered for within the session.
Yeah, and I'm a big proponent of the mixed ability model. I'm
Hmm.
not necessarily advocating for specialized, but yeah, it's just an interesting idea of like what environment is someone most successful in, and then what
Hmm.
environment do they feel most included in.
Yeah.
I think for a long time I thought that inclusion was just like the presence of people with and without disabilities, but
Hmm.
now the literature kind of trends towards inclusion as an experience or as an
Yeah.
emotion that's kind of ever evolving, and it's really up to the individual to determine when they feel included, and not
Hmm.
myself as a gym owner or a coach to say like, oh, this program's inclusive.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's up to the participant, I guess, to a
Hmm.
degree. What are the unique challenges of conducting research with this population?
Hmm. So, one thing that I will start with is that no matter what mood I was in before going to, an assessment or testing session, leaving the session, I was always happy just because the children themselves just make you really, really happy and they're just a joy to be around. But I think some of the challenges or kind of solutions as well that we would have implemented. So, when I was helping with other researchers at the time in those primary school settings, we would have groups of children and we would say, number one, go, do your run. Number two, go. That does not work when you're working in an adapted setting. So we would work one on one with each child and we would go through the full battery of fundamental movement skill assessments with them. As part of the assessment, anyway, you would demonstrate. This time we've actually brought in a visual support protocol. So we're using, the pictorial exchange communication system, symbols and pictures to show the athlete the skill. Then we demonstrate and then we ask them to copy us and to do the skill then. So definitely working on a one-to-one basis, building that rapport, getting to know the athlete's name, a lot of motivation and encouragement is definitely needed in those settings as well. And I think that's probably some of the challenges maybe we might have faced is that not knowing the researchers, but I suppose that could happen anywhere. I think you just have to build that rapport when you go in and make it seem like fun and that it's a game, and not be putting obviously any pressure or anything saying we don't mention that it's a test. We mention that it's a few games that we're doing. We want to see how good you are at performing the skills, and then just rewarding with a sticker and things like that at the end. Um, I think challenging wise, because again, we're a volunteer led organization, sometimes life happens for people. And if there's one lead volunteer, then a session might be cancelled if that volunteer can't attend, which means that we'd miss out on attending the club on that week. Other things, the usual stuff like weather, or if it's an outdoor session and it starts raining really heavy and the children can't be outside. So just those type of challenges really. And I suppose also the number, because we work on a one-to-one basis and most sessions are only 40 minutes to an hour long, we only get through a certain number of children. We only get to assess a certain number. Whereas again, if you were going to a school, you could spend the whole day there and probably do between 30 to 40 children, every hour, hour and a half type thing.
Yeah.
But it's just not the same when you're working with a special population. So our testing periods are that bit more challenging and a bit longer probably than what would typically be expected.
Are you able to articulate, I guess, verbally without visuals and stuff, the criteria of the fundamental movement screen? Like what motor skills you're looking at, what activities they're doing during that testing?
So we use two types of assessment. So we use the test of gross motor development 3, and the BOT 2. So in the TGMD 3, that's things like running, skipping, horizontal jump. In terms of your locomotor skills, your object control would be catching, kicking, overhand throw, underhand throw, one hand strike, things like that. And then the two assessments in the BOT 2 are balance. So a beam balance where you're standing on one leg with your hands on your hips, and then walking heel to toe on a line with hands on your hips. So the ones that the athletes would, or the children would struggle with a lot, is the balance assessment. And when we looked at in terms of percentage mastery, so how close are they at, um, scoring in all of the criteria. So a one would mean that you achieved that criteria, a zero means that you didn't. And there's between 3 and 4 criteria per skill in the test of gross motor development 3. And then for the BOT 2, it's whether you can, how many steps can you do out of those 6, if any. If you get all 6, you don't have to do a second trial, but you're given a second trial if you don't get 6. And then for the beam balance, it's a 10 seconds. Can you hold that position for 10 seconds without dropping your leg? Um, so the balance is definitely in terms of percentage mastery. When we assessed during the doctoral studies 100 children with intellectual disabilities, 0% of them had mastered those skills of balance, which was particularly concerning, because I know in later life for people with intellectual disabilities, the risk of falls and the prevalence of falls tends to be a lot higher. So if at between the ages of 4 to 12, if your balance is already quite poor, where does that leave you as you start to get older? So it was definitely, that was probably the most surprising thing for me that came out of the findings.
Does there need to be a familiarization period for the participants? Like is there some degree of understanding and practicing the test that would just show someone or that would lead to improvement, but not necessarily insinuate that they've globally improved their ability to balance, but just that they got better at that specific test through practice?
Very possibly. I think in terms of the assessment batteries that we were using, and the reason we selected those was because they were deemed to be the most appropriate for field use with that particular population. I know other studies, like we had found afterwards, that visual support protocol was used with the test of gross motor development 3 back in 2017 with children who had autism. And they did show that with the visualization pictures and the cards, that the children perform better in the assessments than without the cards, which is why we introduced them this time to help with cognitive understanding of what we were asking the children to do. Because yes, 100% that probably, I'd almost say definitely comes into play. But in terms of the protocols, the way they stand at the moment, there isn't really a familiarization period. And then again, I suppose if you were to add that in, that even further elongates how much testing
Yeah.
time or assessment time is required. And for the project that we're doing at the moment, we're like under very strict or tight timelines. So we were hoping to assess 90 children within a 3 week period, and the coaches would deliver an 8 week intervention, and then we would reassess it, 8 weeks later, in another 3 week round. So it's quite challenging if you were to add a familiarization period. But I would imagine or hypothesize that it would help.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I just wonder if the first time they're introduced to the test and then they go through the intervention and then they do the test again, whether improvements
Yeah.
are specifically to the intervention, could be attributed specifically to the intervention or to a degree of
Hmm.
being more familiar with the test, being more comfortable with the
Yeah.
test.
And I
Um,
think sometimes it's even a struggle to try and encourage children to come up and do the assessments with us as well, because their session continues on in the background whilst we're working one on one. And it's
distracting.
like, oh, my coach and my friends are having more fun than what you're doing over here with me. So, we did have a few athletes saying, no, that's boring. I don't want to do it. And that's them, saying, no, I'm not consenting to take part. So,
Yeah.
my fear would be to ask them to do it more than once. They would
Uh,
probably be like, nope, I want to just do my session the way it is.
Yeah, it definitely speaks to motivation,
Hmm.
like influencing a lot of test results as well, too, like how engaged they are,
Yeah.
how well they're concentrating on the
Hmm.
task versus being distracted by that
Yes.
external stimuli. Are you able to share kind of what the 8 week intervention plans to look like, or maybe how a fitness program that works with young individuals with disabilities could adopt pieces of this intervention to work on some of these gross motor skills with their clients?
Yeah, so when we were designing it, I suppose some key things that we had in mind was repetition. Number one is really important for this population, and the structure. A lot of the coaches would say to us, the athletes like to follow a same structure. They like to know what happens when they enter the session, what's happening next, and typically how most coaches would end their session is with a parachute game. So what we did was we made sure that over the 8 weeks there was only four warm-ups, activities or games suggested, and they were trying to incorporate, a range of different fundamental movement skills, mainly locomotor and balance for their warm up, and then we would repeat the same four for the following, last 4 weeks of the 8 week program. We also wanted to try and focus on a range of fundamental movement skills as well, because you could just focus, say, on locomotor skills and you're probably guaranteed to see an increase then over 8 weeks. But because of our findings from the PhD, where we were seeing overall low motor skill proficiency across the different skills, we wanted to try and incorporate as many as possible. So each week we would focus on two key skills. Um, we would do like a skill development game or activity where the coach is reinforcing some of the key coaching or teaching points, and then we would focus on a game-based approach incorporating that skill then, and that's kind of the structure of how it would go. We also have an obstacle course each week as well, because again you can get a range of skills in there, and bring in kind of stories as well. You're at the zoo or you're at the circus and you've to splash in the puddles, jump over a log, those type of things where you're really engaging the athletes and getting their imagination working as well.
From your research and your experience out in the field here, what has been the biggest surprise to you, or what has been the thing that has been most unique in terms of maybe what you hypothesized when you started and then what you realized through data collection?
I suppose it does come back to that balance number as well. So we did compare, in previous research, we compared the percentage mastery of balance for children with intellectual disabilities and typically developing children of the same age and gender. So they were age and gender matched. And the typically developing children, it was 75% mastery in the balance compared to the 0%. So that really, really did, not only concern me, but we kind of brought it up to the coaches then in focus groups and said, are you surprised? Like, what do you think of this 0% mastery? And they said, well, you never gave us any equipment, or you never taught us how to do balance activities or coach them. So I think, we were saying, okay, yeah, you are right. So we needed to look then at our equipment pack and toolkit that we provide to the coaches. So we've added now a balance beam, we've added balance rocks, and as part of this new intervention, we are giving coaching cues, and we had videos recorded of each of the activities so the coaches could see exactly how they should be demonstrating each of those as well. So I think coach education is a really big thing, because with Special Olympics, a lot of the coaches may be family members or they may be parents with no sporting background, and the reason they set up a club or the reason they show up week on week is because they want to help and provide something for their child and for other children in the community. So the education side is definitely really important, and we had a coaches training online there last week, just before the intervention started this week, and I was a bit nervous because the coaches are very honest, which I love, but they hadn't seen the session plans yet. So we talked through each of the plans over the 8 weeks, and then I said, "Does anybody have any feedback or questions?" And they said, one of the coaches said, "Yeah, I have something to say," and I was like, And she goes, "I love it. You listen to us in the focus groups. This is exactly what we wanted. We can't wait to try it." So that was really, really nice to hear. And it was, sigh of relief saying, okay, great. It is what they are looking for. And we've managed to put down on paper what the coaches needed. And I had an email from one of the coaches who delivered on Tuesday evening to say it really helped the other volunteers. So it meant that not everybody in the room was relying on him, because I think that's one of the things as well that I was seeing out in the field, was that if there is only one lead person who knows the session plan or the activity, if they get distracted because a child is off maybe doing something that they shouldn't be, then the rest of the session tends to fall apart because other people can't step in and pick up where that person has left off. So everybody, he said he handed the session plan out to everybody and everyone was on the same page then, and most importantly the athletes enjoyed it, which is what we want to be hearing. So
Yeah. Yeah. So the focus group of coaches who are
mhm,
providing feedback as to what they believe they need. You're working with a population that might not be able to always articulate, like, I'm struggling with this
mhm.
or I need to work on that. Do you guys also leverage parent or caregiver surveys to understand where they perceive their children are behind in motor skill development?
So we did previously ask a question, how would you rate your child's ability compared to other children of the same age? I think a lot of people said in and around the same. But it's interesting that you mentioned parents, because I've just sent out a parents questionnaire this afternoon, and what we are assessing now is parents' knowledge and confidence about the topics of physical literacy and fundamental movement skills, because again, we know parents are a big facilitator to children being physically active at a young age, because they're the ones who are putting them in the car and driving them to the sports hall or venue. And again, the research would say that more active parents raise active children. So I think education though is a big part for us, so it'll be interesting now to see how the parents' knowledge and confidence about these topic areas are. And then tomorrow and Sunday, I'm actually out with two clubs, young athletes clubs, delivering parents workshops. So we collaborated with the University of Alberta, who have a workshop called Play Shop, and they deliver that to parents of preschool children aged 3 to 5 years. And when I came across their work, I said, this sounds like something that we really need. So we've been reaching out and linking in with them since September, since we first, had the idea for the project, or started applying for ethical approval. And they've shared their materials with us. And again, a lot of the games that they're teaching the parents, they can be done at home with simple enough equipment, using tea towels or using pillows and things like that. So we put a little parents pack together for tomorrow with bean bags, ropes, I call them like snakes for balancing and walking on, hula hoops, for on the floor and jumping into, balloons, to a small ball for catching, a larger one for kicking, plastic cups to use as a target for kicking into or throwing something at. So the games that the researchers from Play Shop have, I think will be really, really beneficial for the athletes that we work with. So the plan is for this intervention. So um, three groups are taking part in the 8 weeks of session plans, and then another two groups are doing the 8 weeks of session plans plus this parents workshop, and then we have our control group who are just doing their typical weekly session. So the plan will be to see if there's any difference in motor skill proficiency, if there's improvements, and which groups are improving. Is it the one who are doing the weekly with their coach plus doing twice a week with their parents, like a little game for 10 minutes twice a week? I think that'll be really interesting to see, again, with our hypothesis that the more opportunities you get to learn, practice, and reinforce these skills, the better you're going to become at them. So, yeah, that's
Yeah.
the plan.
We try to tie a lot of these episodes into fitness in some way, so maybe we can try to make
Hmm.
this fitness specific. So if a gym was working with young individuals with disabilities, intellectual disabilities, do you have any recommendations, practical recommendations into how they could make a more robust and enjoyable program for young adults with disabilities, intellectual disabilities specifically?
Yeah, I think asking your participants, what would you like to do today or what do you want to focus on? Because again, people coming into a gym, everybody has different goals and different interests of why they want to be there. It might be because I want to get fitter, it might be because maybe I want to lose a bit of weight or I want to run faster or, different things. So I think asking your participants why they're here and what do they want to get out of their session, what exercises do they like doing, or what are some that they don't really like, and if they don't like them, why don't they like them? And again, just making sure that I suppose the people gain confidence in their ability to take part in the exercises as well, because I suppose you want them to be able to, after they finish with you, maybe if they're going into another gym, that that you're confident in their ability to be able to safely carry out the exercises as well.
Yeah, and some of the pieces that you were mentioning during the research, so like visual support protocols, things like that, might make a better learning experience for people with disabilities within the gym as well. So kind of just leveraging presenting materials in different ways that most
Yeah,
people that will listen are
exactly.
probably familiar with universal design. So
Yeah, 100%. I think like a timetable as well. If it's a class and first we're doing this, then we're doing this, and just to kind of provide that reassurance. Because I think some people that I've worked with who have autism as well, they really like structure and they like to know what is happening next and at what time and things like that. So even having a visual schedule of the exercises or activities that you're doing could also be very helpful.
if a gym if a gym wanted to support more individuals with
Hmm.
disabilities, sometimes it just requires like grassroots efforts of reaching out to organizations that are support those clientele and
Yeah.
learning how you can help them. How do you think organizations can collaborate with Special Olympics to be kind of a partner in your mission? So, for example, if you're saying young athletes only meets once a week, if
Hmm.
my gym was 10 minutes away from you, would something like Special Olympics be receptive, you think, to me offering additional programs that kind of supplement what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that we're very lucky with in Ireland is that we have a network of local sports partnerships, is what they're called. So they would be kind of government-led groups that each area in the country, or not each area, but a lot of the areas would have, and they would have a designated person who's called um, sorry, the acronym is SIDO. They are Sports Inclusion Disability Officers. So their whole role would be to create opportunities within the local community for people with disabilities. And Special Olympics would really have strong connections and work with them because, again, for us, it's just about people getting out there and being active. And if that means, like you said, young athletes is only once a week, we would be encouraging you to go to other organizations to get active and to get out there because it'll benefit you across your life then, and it will benefit you when you come and take part in the Special Olympics programs or sport and competition as well. But I think that local sports partnership network is a really big asset that we do have and that we would be encouraging families, athletes, everyone to tap into because they run a lot of free programs as well, which is really beneficial, and it kind of removes that barrier of cost for people as well.
Can you think of any misconceptions that people have about Special Olympics?
One of the big ones when we speak to students is, oh yeah, the Paralympics
Hmm.
would be the
Yeah, yeah.
first thing that people say, or oh, it's for people who don't have limbs, or like they would be kind of some of the statements that people would make. And what through my work, what we've really tried to do, because I want to encourage as many students to get involved as possible, because I think that's how, like yourself as well, when you just get started, you get a love for it. um and so we work with the sports science students who are first years in Dublin City University, and we pair them up with local Special Olympics clubs, and we get them out for a 6 to 8 week period in their own time outside of university hours to get that first taste of volunteer experience. And the feedback from them is, oh, I didn't know, or I didn't realize how sporty people with intellectual disabilities could be. I didn't realize how competitive, how much fun, like crack, all of that type of thing that people would say to us afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, the shared recreation seems to be one of
Yeah.
the best ways to address attitudinal barriers and
Hmm.
expectations or lower expectations that people have
And
for,
because people are
uh,
nervous, I think sometimes as well.
yeah.
If you've never met someone with a disability, I think some people they're worried they'll say the wrong thing or that they'll offend somebody as well. And I think, what our advice would be, just be yourself, just get out there, and people are people at the end of the day. So, I think that's one of the big things that we would say to the students.
Absolutely. What direction do you hope your research or your work goes in the coming years?
Have I thought about this question? I definitely think I would love to stay in my research in the area of adapted physical activity. I potentially would like to broaden it out more towards health, because from my previous role as health and well-being coordinator, we have seen a lot of health disparities, and we know that people with intellectual disabilities face a lot of health disparities compared to the general population. Things like, dying on average 16 to 20 years earlier than the general population, twice as likely to have cardiovascular disease, twice as likely to get things like arthritis. And a lot of those things they're not because of the intellectual disability diagnosis, but because of things like lack of access to healthcare, or equal access to healthcare, lack of accessible health promotion and health education opportunities, those type of things, healthcare professional training or lack of. Because what we've seen is that, again, what we are trying to do, so not only with sports science students, but with students with healthcare backgrounds like audiology, podiatry, ophthalmology, health promotion, that we work with those students, deliver, an inclusive health lecture, teach them about the health disparities that people with ID face, and then give them an opportunity to take part in a health screening. So it's called Healthy Athletes, is one of our free health screening programs that we run, and get them to get hands-on experience working with the population, so that when they become healthcare professionals, when they finish university, that they'll be comfortable and they'll be confident to treat a patient who has an intellectual disability. So that's another big part of the work that we do. And again, I know you mentioned there about the health education programs that I've expanded since I was with the organization. So we introduced things like breast cancer awareness workshops. We introduced Health at Play, so that's health education for the young athletes program, so age 4 upwards. And again, some of the coaches were saying, "What? How do you do health education with 4-year olds?" And I said, "Okay, we'll show you." So a lot of things. Like a giant clock to talk about sleep. So, what time do we go to bed at? What time do we wake up at? A lot of visual props and tools for hydration. We have our giant toilet bowls with little, they call them like puddles or pools of urine, so the different colors of urine, and you say which color should it be and what color is it really though. And when we drink enough water, we know it should be very light yellow and not smelly. So these are the type of things for the health at play with the younger athletes that we do, because again, getting that health knowledge from a younger age and carrying that on through as you get older, we just hope to kind of intercept early and establish those lifelong health behaviors from a young age within the program. And then we've also brought in mental health, was a big one as well around COVID, with athletes saying to us, our adult athletes saying that they were experiencing feelings of social isolation and loneliness, and they missed their friends, they missed their activities that Special Olympics would have provided. Um, and that again, for athletes who are going the competitive route and selected for a World Games opportunity, it's a big deal, and a lot of nerves and anxiety can come with that, being away from home for the first time, getting on a plane for the first time, sharing a room with somebody for the first time who snores or likes the light on and you don't like the light on. So our Stronger Minds, Happier Lives program is a 5 module program that we worked with Mental Health Ireland on to design that, and that was co-produced with a team of Special Olympics athletes who are health messengers. So they've been trained as role models and advocates for their own health, but the health of all athletes or people with intellectual disabilities. So that team would speak a lot at different conferences or events and advocate on behalf of people with ID as well. So they're just some of the programs that we've created and got up and running to help try and end some of the health disparities that this group face.
Yeah, you got your hand in a lot of different projects.
Yeah.
So you had first mentioned, like, you had mentioned wanting to move from adaptive PA to health globally, and I was going to ask how you defined health, but it seems like you encompassed it pretty well there. So not just physical health, but also emotional health, mental health, etc.
Yeah.
So
And I think yesterday actually we were down in a county in Ireland called Limerick because we have been chosen, I say we, a team of consultants, which I'm lucky to be part of, all really brilliant researchers in the field of intellectual disability research and studies, came together and put in a proposal to Special Olympics International when they put out a call to look at and assess the healthcare system through a systems level approach. So we were one of 10 sites selected. We're the only country in Europe to be selected for this project, and this team of researchers over the next few weeks are going to deep dive into the Irish healthcare system and see, is it really inclusive and accessible for people with intellectual disabilities. So I think that's a really great start on starting to look at health for this population and something that hasn't been done previously.
yeah, that'll be really interesting to see the results of that. Is
Mhm.
that through what organization is that through? Just if people want to kind of be
So,
attuned to
Special
the
Olympics
results.
International have partnered with the Missing Billion Initiative, and they created a separate IDD module that is, added on to the Missing Billion criteria, and that's basically the assessment tool that we'll be using to determine whether the healthcare system is inclusive for people with ID or not. I think some of the other there's 3 states in the US that are involved in the project as well. I think Wisconsin was one of them, and there's another 2 on the map that they've shared. I think places like India and things. So, but Ireland was the only European country selected to be part of this project. So we're very grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. If people want to learn more about the work that you're doing, we can include it in the show notes, of course. But where would you direct them to go, or what resources would you share?
So our social media, Special Olympics Ireland social media pages, we have Instagram and Facebook, and I suppose about Special Olympics in general, specialolympics.org for internationally to see where, if you want to volunteer or what are the sports that we deliver and run and things like that, and to see there's over 170 countries involved with Special Olympics. So no matter where you are around the world, I'm sure you'd be able to find a club if you wanted to volunteer. And
Yeah.
then my LinkedIn, I love LinkedIn. I love posting updates and things like that, and sharing work and projects that's happening. So happy for people to connect with me on LinkedIn with under Hayley Kavanagh.
Yeah, if you hadn't mentioned it, I was going to say LinkedIn because that was the first way I was introduced to your
Yeah.
work was just through finding one of the research papers that you shared. And you're always posting a lot of good resources, and even preparing for this, I was mostly just able to read through your LinkedIn feed and learned a lot about the work that you were doing, which is rare. Not everyone shares things openly on LinkedIn for their work, but I think it's awesome. It's supposed to be a professional network, so it's the perfect place for that. So we'll include your LinkedIn page in the show notes as well as Special Olympic Ireland pages. But Hayley, it was great to learn more about what you're doing. I really both appreciate it and value it greatly. So again, we'll share those things so people can connect with you if they're interested in learning more. Maybe if someone wants to start a young athletes program, they can learn from the model that you guys have created. And yeah, I appreciate your time and look forward to sharing this with our audience.
No, thank you so much. It was great being here.
Thank you for listening to the AdaptX podcast. Our effort to amplify the ideas of our guests and create more inclusive and accessible industries is futile unless these episodes reach a larger audience. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please leave us a rating or a review on whichever platform you use. And if you would like to learn more about AdaptX, the course that we teach to health and fitness professionals and the projects that our organization is working on, you can subscribe to our newsletter through our website, www.adaptx.org. Until next Monday.